The reading lasted 42 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the wall of attorney Howard Bennett's office in Phoenix, Arizona, for most of those 42 minutes with the particular focused attention of someone who needs something concrete to look at while processing information that is simultaneously expected and painful. Expected because I had known for 3 years that my father's estate would reflect his marriage to Gloria more than it would reflect his 28 years as my father. Painful because knowing something is coming and experiencing its arrival are two entirely different things, and the gap between them is where grief lives. Howard read through the standard elements methodically: the house in Scottsdale, the investment accounts, the retirement funds, the vacation property in Sedona that my father had purchased 6 years earlier, which I had visited exactly once because Gloria preferred the coast and visits had not been organized around my preferences for a very long time. Gloria sat in the center chair with her daughter from her first marriage, Vanessa beside her, and the composed satisfaction of someone watching a process conclude in the direction they had organized it to conclude. My name appeared twice, once for a modest cash bequest my father had specified as my inheritance, an amount that was technically generous and contextually inadequate given the size of the estate, and that communicated through its specificity exactly how carefully it had been calibrated to be sufficient without being significant. Once for my grandfather's pocket watch, a small thing, a genuine thing. The kind of specific personal bequest that suggests a person thought carefully about at least one element of what they were leaving and who they were leaving it to. I received the watch and the cash bequest. Gloria received everything else. Howard finished reading. He looked at me over his reading glasses with an expression that was professionally neutral and that contained, underneath the neutrality, something I read as discomfort. He said there was one additional matter to address. Gloria looked at him. He said it would require a separate conversation. He looked at me. He said, "Miss Reeves, could you stay for a moment after the others have gone? My name is Claire Reeves, and I am 31 years old, and my father was a man who loved me genuinely and managed that love poorly for the last decade of his life. I want to say both of those things clearly at the beginning because the story I am telling requires holding both simultaneously, and the holding is easier when both are stated plainly rather than implied. My parents divorced when I was 16. My father was 51. My mother was 49. The marriage had been 30 years long and had produced me and my younger brother Marcus and a shared life in Phoenix that had the specific quality of something built carefully over a long time. The divorce was not the result of a single event. It was the result of the particular slow erosion that happens when two people have grown in different directions across 3 decades and have not addressed the growing and have arrived somewhere they did not plan to be and from which there is no obvious path back to where they started. My father met Gloria 18 months after the divorce. She was 44 to his 52. She had been divorced once and had one daughter and had the particular organized energy of someone who had built a life on her own terms and who moved through the world with the focused intention of someone who had learned not to wait for circumstances to arrange themselves favorably. She loved my father. I believed this. I continued to believe it throughout the decade of their relationship, and I believe it still. The love was genuine. It was also organized. Gloria was a person who organized things, including the circumstances of the life she built with my father, including the gradual reorganization of his relationship with his children from his first marriage, including the estate documents that had been revised twice during the decade of the marriage in ways that each seemed individually explicable, and that accumulated into the 42-minute reading in Howard Bennett's office. My brother Marcus had made peace with the situation 4 years earlier by deciding that the estate was ultimately my father's to organize as he chose, and that investing energy in what he could not control was a cost he was not willing to pay. Marcus was not wrong about that. I had taken longer to arrive at the same position. I was still arriving at it when Howard Bennett asked me to stay. Gloria left the office without looking at me. Vanessa glanced at me once on the way out, not unkindly, with the particular uncomfortable sympathy of someone who is aware that the situation they are benefiting from is not entirely comfortable to benefit from and who has not fully decided what to do with that awareness. The door closed. Howard Bennett removed his reading glasses and set them on the desk. He said, "I want to show you something." He reached into a different drawer than the one that had held the estate documents. He removed a folder. He set it on the desk between us, he said. Your father came to see me 6 weeks before he died. Without Gloria. Without any prior appointment. He arrived at my office on a Tuesday morning and asked if I had time to speak with him privately. I looked at the folder. Howard said, "What I am about to tell you is covered by attorney-client privilege that transferred to you as a named beneficiary in the document your father prepared during that meeting. I want you to understand that I am not acting outside my professional obligations in sharing this with you. Your father specifically instructed me to share it." I said I understood. Howard opened the folder. He said, "Your father prepared a secondary document 6 weeks before his death. It is separate from the primary estate documents that were read today. It was prepared without Gloria's knowledge and at your father's specific request." He turned the folder toward me. Inside was a document, and beneath the document was an envelope. My name on the front in my father's handwriting. I did not open the envelope immediately. Howard explained the document first because the document was the context for the envelope, and he was a methodical man who understood that context mattered. My father had maintained a separate financial account for the last 4 years of his life, not hidden in any illegal sense. Simply separate. His own account from a financial institution that was not connected to the joint accounts he maintained with Gloria. He had contributed to it regularly from consulting income he had earned independently during his semi-retirement. Income that was legitimately his own, and that he had directed into this account rather than into the joint accounts. The account was not large relative to the primary estate. It was significant in its own right. Howard said the account had been designated in the secondary document as a direct transfer to Claire Marie Reeves. Me. Without going through the primary estate. Without any involvement of the primary estate's terms. The transfer was clean. Properly documented. Executed at the same time as the secondary document, 6 weeks before my father's death. Howard said the amount. I looked at the desk. I thought about the cash bequest in the primary estate. The carefully calibrated amount that was sufficient without being significant. This amount was significant. Howard said, "Your father was very clear about his instructions. He wanted you to receive this separately from the primary estate. He wanted it handled outside the normal estate process. He wanted me to present it to you privately after the primary reading was complete." I said, "Why?" Howard looked at the envelope. He said, "I think he wanted to explain that himself." I held the envelope for a moment without opening it. The weight of it. My father's handwriting on the front. The particular quality of something that has been prepared carefully and kept waiting for its moment. Then I opened it. My father had written 5 pages, not in the careful, controlled handwriting of someone composing a formal document. In the handwriting of someone writing quickly and honestly, the pen moving faster than the management of what it was saying, producing something that felt more like speech than writing. He began by saying he did not know how to write this letter. He said he had started it 3 times and thrown away each version because each version was trying to manage something rather than say it. And what needed to be said could not be managed and still be true. He wrote about Gloria. He wrote that he loved her and that the love was real and that the estate reflected both the love and the decade of their life together and that this was appropriate. He wrote that something else was also true. He wrote, "Claire, I have watched what happened between us over the last 10 years with a specific kind of pain that I did not know how to address while it was happening and that I am trying to address now in the only way available to me. I watched Gloria organize the circumstances of our life in ways that created distance between me and you and Marcus. I am not saying she did this deliberately. I am saying it happened and that I allowed it to happen and that allowing it was a choice I made every time I did not push back against the circumstances as they developed." He wrote, "I told myself that you were adults, that you did not need me in the same ways, that the relationships would maintain themselves. These were the things I told myself. The true thing underneath them was that addressing the distance would have required a conversation with Gloria that I was not willing to have and that I made you pay the cost of my unwillingness." I read that sentence twice. He had named it, not in the comfortable general way, a specific way. The cost of my unwillingness. He had sat with a specific accounting of what he had done and had written it plainly. He wrote about the account. He wrote that he had opened it 4 years ago, when he had begun to understand that the primary estate would not reflect what he actually wanted for me. That the primary estate reflected a decade of accumulated decisions that had moved in one direction, and that reversing those decisions would have required a confrontation he had not had. He had found another way. He wrote, "This is not what I should have given you. What I should have given you was a father who pushed back earlier, who had the conversation with Gloria that needed to be had, who organized the circumstances of our life
so that you and Marcus were central rather than peripheral to it. I cannot give you that. I can give you this. It is not enough. I know it is not enough. I hope it is something. Then he wrote about my childhood. Not the decade before his death. The years before Gloria. The specific years that had been ours before the divorce changed the configuration of everything. He wrote about the summer I was 9 when we had driven across New Mexico and Texas in the family car over 2 weeks and had stopped at every roadside attraction regardless of quality. Because I had insisted, and he had found my insistence more entertaining than any of the attractions themselves. He wrote about the particular pride of watching me graduate from Arizona State and the specific way the pride had arrived. Not as general parental satisfaction, but as the precise recognition of someone watching a person they loved become fully themselves. He wrote about the watch. He wrote that his own father had given it to him the year he finished his engineering degree, and that he had given it to me rather than Marcus, not because he loved Marcus less, but because Marcus had his grandfather's name, and I had his grandfather's eyes, and the watch was the thing most connected to the grandfather whose eyes I had. He wrote, I see him when I look at you, Claire. I have seen him since you were 3 years old. He would have loved you so much. I set the letter down. I looked at the ceiling of Howard Bennett's office. The Phoenix afternoon light was coming through the window at the angle October light comes through windows in Phoenix. Direct and warm and somewhat relentless. I thought about my grandfather. A man who had died when I was 7 and whom I remembered in the specific fragmentary way you remember people who left before you were old enough to know them fully. His hands. The smell of his workshop. The watch on his wrist that I'd been fascinated by as a small child because it made a specific ticking sound that I had found endlessly satisfying. The watch was in my bag. Howard had given it to me before he explained the second document. I had not yet connected the watch to the letter. Now I did. Howard gave me 20 minutes alone. He left without being asked. He simply stood and said he would be in the reception area and to take whatever time I needed, and he left. I sat in his office alone with the 5 pages and the watch in my bag and the Phoenix light and the particular specific grief of someone who has received something genuine and late simultaneously. Not just the account. The letter. The account was money. Real and significant. And I was honest with myself that it mattered practically in ways that had nothing to do with grief. But the letter was the thing. The specific naming of specific things. The cost of my unwillingness. The summer across New Mexico and Texas. The grandfather's eyes. The watch. He had thought about me specifically. Not as the daughter the estate had to account for. As the person he had known for 31 years, whose summer at 9 years old had included insisting on roadside attractions, and whose eyes looked like his father's eyes. He had held those things. He had written them down. He had given them to Howard to give to me in a separate envelope after the primary reading was complete, because he had understood that the primary reading would not feel like him and he had wanted something that felt like him to arrive after. That was his intelligence about me. He had known how the primary reading would feel. He had prepared something for after it. Howard came back in after 20 minutes. He sat across from me. He said, Are you all right? I said yes. Mostly, he said. Your father was very specific in his instructions. He wanted to make sure you received this separately and privately, and that the explanation came from him rather than from me. I said I know. The letter explains it. Howard nodded. He said, He also asked me to tell you something verbally. Something he said he had not written in the letter, because he wanted it said rather than written. I waited. Howard said, He asked me to tell you that watching you become who you are has been the thing he was most proud of in his life. He said to tell you specifically, not as a general statement. Specifically. He wanted you to know it was specific. I looked at the watch in my hand. I thought about my grandfather's workshop and the ticking sound. I thought about my father at 30 sitting at a kitchen table becoming an engineer and his father handing him a watch. I thought about the summer across New Mexico and Texas and my 9-year-old insistence on roadside attractions and my father finding it more entertaining than the attractions. I thought about the cost of my unwillingness written plainly in 5 pages. I said, He could have told me this himself. Howard said, Yes. I said, He had time. Howard said, Yes, he did. I said, Why didn't he? Howard looked at me with the expression of someone who knows the answer and is deciding how to say it. Then he said, I think because saying it to you directly required a conversation about everything that had prevented him from saying it sooner. And that conversation required an honesty with himself that arrived too late for him to be willing to have it face to face. I sat with that. Then I said, So he wrote it down. Howard said, He wrote it down. I said, and trusted you to give it to me, Howard said. Yes. I thought about what it cost a person to write 5 pages of specific true things and give them to an attorney to deliver rather than saying them to the face of the person they needed to reach. It cost something. It was also more than some people manage. I held both of those things. I called Marcus from the parking garage. He answered immediately because he had been waiting, and we both knew he had been waiting, even though neither of us had said so. I told him about the second folder. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He planned this." I said yes. Marcus said, 6 weeks before he died, he walked into Howard's office without telling Gloria and set up a separate account transfer. I said yes. Marcus was quiet again. Then he said, "That took something." I said it did. Marcus said, "It was not enough." I said, "I know." He said, "But it was something." I said it was something. We sat on the phone together for a moment. The two of us in the particular quiet of siblings who have processed something significant together and are now simply present for each other across the miles between Phoenix and Denver, where Marcus had been living for 2 years. He said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I think so." "Ask me tomorrow," he said. "I will ask you tomorrow." We hung up. I sat in the parking garage of Howard Bennett's building in Phoenix and looked at my grandfather's watch in my hand and listened to it tick. The same specific ticking sound I had been fascinated by at 3 years old. Still there. Still precise. Still doing the thing it had always done with complete indifference to the time that had passed since anyone had listened closely enough to hear it. I drove to my mother's house. Not deliberately planned. Simply where I went. The particular gravity of the place that has held you longest, pulling you toward it when you need somewhere to be after something significant. My mother, Eleanor, lived in the house in Phoenix where I had grown up. She had stayed after the divorce because the house was paid off and the neighborhood was familiar, and because she was 61 years old and had decided that stability was worth more than a fresh start at 61. She was in the garden when I pulled up. She came through the gate when she saw my car. She took one look at my face. She said, "Come inside." We sat at the kitchen table where I had done homework for 12 years, and she made tea without asking because she had always known I needed tea before I could talk properly. I told her about the reading. I told her about the second folder. I told her about the letter. She listened the way she always listened. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He kept the account for 4 years." I said, "Yes." She said, "That is 4 years of deciding consistently." I said, "I know." She said, "That matters." I said, "I know that too." She looked at the watch on the table between us. I had set it there when I sat down. She had looked at it once and had not said anything. Now she picked it up. She held it. She said, "I remember this watch. He wore it at our wedding. His father gave it him the year before, and he wore it at our wedding. I had not known that." She set it down. She said, "He gave it to you." I said, "Yes, because I have his grandfather's eyes, apparently." My mother looked at me. She said, "You do. You always have." I said, "Did you know his grandfather?" She said, "I met him once, at a family gathering before the wedding. He was a very quiet man. He watched everything. He shook my hand and looked at me for a long moment and said, 'Your parents raised you well.' That was the only thing he said to me." She paused. She said, "He shook my hand and looked at your father and nodded once, like he was confirming something." I looked at the watch. I thought about a chain of people connected by eyes and watches, and the specific ways that love travels across generations in the objects and the looks and the particular moments of recognition between people who share something without knowing exactly what they share. I thought about my father walking into Howard Bennett's office on a Tuesday morning 6 weeks before his death and asking for time to speak privately. He had known something was coming. He had done something about it. Late. Not too late. Both of those things Gloria called 2 weeks after the reading. Not to discuss the second document. Howard had handled the legal communication about that with her attorney, and the matter had produced no contest, because the account had been entirely my father's own money, designated through a legal mechanism that left no opening for challenge. She called about the watch. She said she had understood from Vanessa that the watch had been given to me, and she wanted to say that she thought that was the right decision. She said my father had talked about the watch, and about his grandfather, and about me having his grandfather's eyes more than once in the years they were together. She said, "I think he always planned for it to go to you. I don't know why he didn't just say so." I said, I think there were a lot of things he found easier to plan than to say. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Yes, that's true. We talked for 10 more minutes. Not warmly, not coldly. With the particular careful honesty of two people who have been adjacent to each other in a complicated situation and are now navigating what comes after the complication. She said she hoped I would come to Phoenix sometimes, that she knew the relationship had been complicated, and that she did not expect it to be uncomplicated now, but that she had cared about my father, and that caring about him meant caring about the things he cared about. I said I would think about it. She said that was fair. We hung up. I sat for a moment thinking about Gloria, about the organized energy and the decade of gradual reorganization, and the estate that reflected a decade of accumulated decisions. About the specific love she had had for my father that had been real and that had also organized things in directions that had cost me. Both of those things were true about Gloria, the same way both things were true about my father. People are not simply their worst choices or their best ones. They are the accumulation of both moving through time. I had been taught this by my mother, who had never said a negative word about my father in the 20 years since the divorce. I was still learning it. The watch helped. The letter helped. The 5 pages of specific true things, written quickly without management, helped more than anything, because they showed me that my father had arrived at the honest accounting even if he had arrived at it in a parking lot, rather than face to face. He had arrived. That was nothing. I am 31 years old, and I have my grandfather's watch on my wrist as I write this. I wind it every morning. Not because the watch requires daily winding. It does not. It has a mechanism that maintains itself through movement. But because winding it in the morning is a moment of contact with the object, and through the object with my grandfather, whom I remember in fragments, and with my father, who wrote 5 pages of specific true things 6 weeks before he died, and with the particular chain of people I come from, that extends further back than anyone alive can now describe. The watch ticks. It has always ticked. It will tick after I am gone. That is what certain objects do. They outlast the people who gave them and become the evidence that the people existed and that the giving happened. My grandfather gave the watch to my father the year he became an engineer. My father gave the watch to me because I have his grandfather's eyes. I will give it to someone someday. Not yet, but someday. And whoever receives it will know something about the chain of people it has moved through, even if they do not know all of the stories. Even if they cannot read the 5 pages or hear the 42 minutes, or understand what was in the second folder that Howard Bennett kept in a separate drawer from the primary estate documents. They will know the watch ticks. They will know it came from someone who thought they should have it. That is the most honest thing any of us can leave. The evidence of having thought carefully about who should receive the things that matter. My father thought carefully about the watch. He thought carefully about the account. He thought carefully about the 5 pages in the Tuesday morning visit to Howard's office and the instruction to present the second folder privately after the primary reading was complete. He organized it all, late. He organized it. And in that organizing was the love that had always been present in the form available to him rather than the form I had needed. I am learning to receive the form that was available. It is not the same as receiving the form I needed. It is nothing. I hold both. Thank you for being here today. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who might need the reminder.